This is lecture one on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Here we will introduce the central notion to his work, which is that of goodwill, and we will relate it to virtues and other types of good, as well as introduce yet another central notion to Kant, which is that of pure reason. Kant presents us with what a serious investigation into the good would be like, as did Aristotle. The basic question there was, what does it mean to live a good life? And so for that purpose, we want to investigate into the notion of the good. So Kant presents us with what a serious investigation into the good would be like. Let us imagine a person sitting down and inquiring into what is meant by the good in the most serious, most absolute sense. It is the kind of good that we take morality to be about. Just as in Aristotle, morality was about how to live the good life, in the same way, in Kant, morality is about how to live a proper human life. Kant claims that we all have a sense of this good and some insight into it, at least in the form of an intuition. So we may not be exactly certain of what the fully blown out theory of it is, but we have an intuition and an insight into the sense of the good. But our sense of it is general, vague, ambiguous, and mostly implicit until we reflect upon that sense and make it more explicit by articulating our founding intuition by means of concepts. Kant's investigation is a generation of such concepts. At the start, Kant claims, as one begins to reflect on oneself as a moral being with an access to morality, there is a fundamental insight. It is the good will that makes anything moral and is the source of morality and is itself morality and nothing else is. The good will is the source of morality. It is morality. It's at the center of morality, and it's what we begin our thinking about morals with, claims Kant. Everything else can only become good in the moral sense by participation in the goodwill. There are all kinds of other goods. There are things that taste good, there are things that we enjoy, there are things that are good for accomplishing other things, in the Aristotelian sense of being a means to an end. But none of these things are good in the moral sense, in the highest sense. Only the goodwill is good in this highest and moral sense. Right away, we should say that the goodwill does not mainly mean what persons normally mean by good intentions. Our intuition of the goodwill is as the only thing that is morally good is referring to something that includes good intentions, is the source of goodness of good intentions, but is itself something more morally great and pure. So much so that we may not recognize it as good intentions at all when we look at the goodwill all by itself. So, what does Kant offer in support of that? The goodwill is the only thing that is moral and is the source of all that is morally good, an intuition that we all share. The evidence is this. We know that all those other goods can be misused. And when we say that they may be misused, we mean that they may be done without the goodwill. The goodwill, on the other hand, is the only thing that may not be misused, claims Kant. Kant almost openly picks up the torch from and challenges Aristotle here. The both of them will agree that something is as good as health and wealth can be misused. And therefore, health and wealth is not what we mean by the good in itself. But for Aristotle, that means that health and wealth would be used without virtues when they are misused, as if virtues were what is good in itself and are the source of goodness of everything. But Kant attacks the Aristotelian virtues. He makes a list of virtues: temperance, courage, prudence, and virtues of intellect and desire in general, such as intelligence and character, and then points out that all these virtues can also be misused, unless the will with which these virtues are possessed and exercised is good. One can use temperance, courage, prudence, and so on, intelligence, for evil purposes. And unless the goodwill is present, there's a real danger of that. On the other hand, if they are in fact used with goodwill, then they can only be used for good purposes and not for evil. I'm using evil in a rather exaggerated sense here, just means something that's awful and very bad, without any theological connotations of that term. In addition to a criticism of virtues, we can also say that the only time any action is good, in the highest moral sense, is when it is done with the goodwill. If someone does something good in the sense of beneficial for us, it has no moral deepest worth if it is done without goodwill. It would be done for some sort of a benefit for the doer, or because the doer happens to like doing that sort of a thing, or because the doer likes us. It is fortunate and happy that the doer's preferences work that way, but there's no moral worth in a person simply acting on their preferences. Not that there is anything wrong with acting on one's preferences in the moral sense, but there's also nothing morally right or praiseworthy about that either. All of this, Kant tells us, is so, in our estimation. Due to that, we can ascend to the standpoint of pure rationality. In other words, from the standpoint of desire, as long as we enjoy and are happy about the products of health, wealth, virtues, without the goodwill, without the goodwill, they're great. But from the standpoint of pure reason, we understand that all of these are without any moral value so long as they are not employed with goodwill.